Most of us have to take people's money to actually keep the doors open, and we call this payment processing. Now, way back in the day, I'm old, okay? And way back in the day when I started working in mail order marketing, and that's what we used to call e-commerce before we had the internet, okay? It was a very different place. Back then, credit cards were available, but not nearly as readily available as they are now, okay? Nowadays, they're sending them to high school seniors. They're sending applications to high school seniors and stuff like that. Back when I started doing mail order marketing, you had to have a significant credit line or credit rating just to be able to qualify for one of these. So, but now credit cards are available. Back then they weren't. So we had to offer customers other options. Now, most mail order companies had it broken down into 3 options. You could use a credit card. If you were cutting edge, man, you could use a credit card. And that's when you called that 800 number and operators are standing by. And that's what we did. You would give us your number and we would process the charge and then we would ship you the merchandise. The next was mail in a check. And this was not nearly as effective as the credit card because of the immediacy. Okay, with a credit card, if you see something on a commercial that you like, you could pull it out and right then order it. If you're going to mail in a check, you had to write down our address. You had to actually fill out that check. And at any point, you could change your mind and just not decide not to. So we called that friction in marketing. And there was just too much friction in check. I didn't process many checks in that. I processed a lot more that were COD or cash on delivery. And that was the third option. And this was a horrible option, okay? Because what it meant was I'd go ahead and ship you the product, but you had to give the mailman the money when you got the product, either cash or check. Mailmen don't take credit cards now. They never did then. Just got no place to swipe them. So but you had to give them the money. And if they showed up and all of a sudden you realize, hey, I spent the money already, well, the product came back to me. And I don't know about where you live, but the U.S. Postal Service is not known for its careful handling of small packages. So I used to ship out videos and they were in boxes about this big. And if I got them back, they looked like they'd been beat to heck and back. So, you know, it was not really a great option. And quite honestly, about half of the products we sent out on COD came back. That's why it wasn't a great option. These days, you've got so many more options. And so let's talk about a few of them. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now, before we get into it, let me just remind everybody, throughout this entire series, we've been talking about WordPress and WooCommerce. Now, all of the options, or most of the options, not all, but most of the options that I'm going to talk about today are available to anyone using any other system. If you're not using WordPress or WooCommerce, that's fine. You're still going to learn something. But I'm going to focus on WooCommerce and I'm going to focus on WordPress. Just makes my job a little easier, especially since my friends at SiteGrounds are the one that's footing the bill for this, and they specialize in word processing. They specialize in WordPress and WooCommerce hosting, okay? And by the way, if you have not yet picked a hosting partner for your e-commerce platform, you really want to take a look at SiteGround. So let's take a look first. When you install WordPress and WooCommerce, and on SiteGround, that's a matter of clicking about 4 buttons and boom, it's all set up for you. It's actually very cool. And I know this because every time I do one of these webinars, I set up another test site. And I have run through this so many times that I can almost do it in my sleep now. But it is so easy. It's like 3 or 4 buttons, boom, I'm done. But when I set up WooCommerce and as my e-commerce solution, I have 4 different basic options. And these are the standard options that come built into WooCommerce. The first is direct bank transfers. Now, I don't talk about that at all in this session. Somebody was asking about that in the comments earlier, and the reason I don't is direct bank transfers vary by country. I mean, they vary a lot. I know in Europe and in the EU, it's actually very easy. I lived for a year in the Netherlands, and direct bank transfers are very easy and to do. I used to pay my rent and all kind of stuff with that. Here in the US, they're not nearly that easy, and they're not usually considered an option. The only time I ever did that was when I had to transfer some money over to my account in the Netherlands. So direct bank transfers we don't cover. If that's where you're headed, there's some great tutorials out there, but that's just not what we're going to cover. WooCommerce also allows you to pay by checks. And actually, when I'm setting up a test store and running through things other than payment processors, this is always the option that I choose. Oh yeah, I'll send you a check. And the way it works is in e-commerce is somebody places the order. They say, I'm going to send in a check. And then you sit there on the order and wait on it until you actually receive the check. It's very old school, but it's a great test option to have. And if you are dealing primarily with locals, then checks are a good option. Then there's the dreaded cash on delivery, or COD, and you can still do COD. I don't recommend COD, okay? And like I said, at least half of the orders that I shipped out a good number of videos. At least half of them came back from the CODs. It's just not a great option, but it is there. And then PayPal Standard. Now, PayPal Standard is the one where PayPal takes the order and takes over to the PayPal site. They have to log in, and with their PayPal, then they process it, then it comes back to you. That's the PayPal Standard. I'm not a huge fan of this for various reasons, but the number one reason is it takes customers off your site. But if you want to get up and running in a hurry and all you've got is PayPal, you can get up and running with the standard WooCommerce setup, and that's the takeaway here. Okay, now, okay, so let's talk about the major players. In any area, when we're talking about payment processors, we've got the top tier, we've got the next tier down, the up-and-comers, and then we've got everybody else. And I'm not minimizing the everybody else. The reason I'm not talking about them is they vary geographically, they vary country by country. Do yourself a favor and investigate the options that you have, because what you might find is either A, there is somebody that will give you better terms than one of these major players, or B, there's a payment processor that most of your customers have access to that I'm not discussing here, and that's the one you want, because you want to be where your customers are, not just necessarily at the best one, okay? So the major players, PayPal, Stripe, and Square. Those are the big ones, okay? And everybody knows PayPal. Stripe started a few years back, probably 10 years back, 10, 12 years back. I personally love Stripe. Square I used for in-person events. And I used to be a big Renaissance Fair junkie. I have pictures of me dressed up as a pirate and all this kind of stuff. You know, most families have a family doctor or family barber. We had a family costumer, and she would make our costumes for us. And when I go to Ren fairs, almost everybody would take, MasterCard or Visa for all the stuff. And it was fun to watch as Square just became the predominant one. And you'd see those little adapters on the top of their phones. These days, they're all Bluetooth because Apple's done away with the plugs. But you'd see the readers everywhere, and just watching those pop up, it was always fun. But that's Square's predominant market, although they do have an e-commerce offering, but that's relatively new. Then we've got the up-and-comers, okay? These are the processors that aren't quite there. They're brand new. They don't have the proven track record, but as you're going to see, they do have the brand name. And the two that I've listed as up-and-comers are Amazon. I hope everybody's heard of Amazon. And WooCommerce. Believe it or not, WooCommerce does have a payment solution. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. I can already tell you I'm hoping we've got a lot of questions because this one's going to be shorter than normal. Normally I go 45 minutes and then we got questions. We'll be doing good to go 30 minutes on this one. But let's talk a little bit first before we go into, we're going to dive into each one of those. But before we dive into each one of them, let's look at a few things, or the three things that are really important to know about whatever payment processor you're considering, okay? And those three things are the transaction percentage, the transaction fees, and I should have put an S on there because there's usually more than one fee, and then reoccurring payments, okay? And by number three, I mean, will they process reoccurring payments? See, one of the reasons we use credit card processors these days is we don't ever want to store the credit card number on our system. Okay, you never ever want to store it in your database or on your file system. You never want to have it there. Most of these systems, your system, your server will never see the credit card number. The credit card number will be in the user's browser's memory, and it will be transmitted directly to the payment processor. Things that you don't have access to, you're not responsible for, and this is a big one. And I speak as someone who actually in the late 90s wrote a system that stored credit card numbers, not encrypted credit card numbers, just credit card numbers in a database, because that's what the customer wanted. And we didn't know any better back then. Thankfully, that system never got hacked, and it is no longer in use. But you never want to store that, but that makes having subscriptions or club memberships and stuff like that, that makes that kind of difficult because you need that reoccurring payment. Well, all the major systems or major payment processors these days will process recurring payments. And you want to make sure, if you're not using one of the ones we're describing, that's one of the things that you want to make sure you're going to do if you plan on having a subscription. Now, if you don't plan on having any kind of subscription or membership fee or anything like that, then you don't have to worry about that. Transaction fee, there's always a fee on top of a percentage of the order that they charge for every transaction. So if you're doing a 25-cent transaction, you're still going to pay, I think the minimum, the smallest I've seen is 30 cents. 30 cents USD. All the currencies I give you here are in US dollars. They will, of course, translate it into your local currency if you're not using USD. But if you're doing a 25-cent transaction and you're still going to pay a 30% or a 30-cent transaction fee plus a transaction percentage. So be careful, be sure you know what it is. And then the number one thing is, of course, the transaction percentage. Now, the numbers I'm about to show you are all baseline numbers. These are the most expensive transactions that these companies process because they're for small businesses with low volumes, okay? When you get up into the larger scale stuff, if you are, one of my favorite, or actually one of my wife's favorite companies is a coffee company called Black Rifle Coffee. She absolutely loves their stuff. And they ship all over the world, and they ship just a ton of coffee, okay? When you get up into that kind of volume, then all of these are negotiable. All fees are negotiable. But the numbers I'm going to show you right now are just for the beginner level. And they're just for comparison, okay? So let's look at it. Stripe. Now, Stripe is my favorite. I make no bones about that, okay? Stripe was originally developed for developers to put into their systems. They were API first, everything else was second. And if you weren't a developer, in the early days, if you weren't a developer, you couldn't even set up an account because part of it was done from the command line just to make sure you were a developer. It was also very cool. So I love Stripe. And Stripe, at their base level, charges 2.9% of the transaction. So right off the top, they're going to take almost 3% of the transaction. And as you can see, that's almost standard. Then they're going to take 30 cents on top of that as the transaction fee. And as you can see, everybody, I'm not going to go through this for everybody, but everybody that we're talking about will do recurring payments, okay? And as you can see, PayPal is exactly the same. Square is a little bit different. Square has a smaller transaction percentage and a much smaller transaction fee. Be careful though, okay? Square is new into the e-commerce market. They are big in the what we call in real life or meat space market, okay, where you physical transactions. They're big in that. They are a wonderful choice if you do fairs or you do we have a farmers market here in West Palm Beach every week during the fall and winter, and a lot of the vendors will process everything just through Square, and it's wonderful for that. But they're new into e-commerce, so if you're going to get into using them for e-commerce, make sure you know what you're getting into. But that's the reason their transaction fees are smaller, is because they're new and they're trying to attract customers. Then there's Amazon Pay. Now, I'll be honest with you. I saw when Amazon first released Amazon Pay, I looked at it and go, oh, okay. But the more I dug into it, the more I found it interesting, but I'm not sure that I'm going to be using it for any of mine. The basic concept is everybody has an Amazon account, or most people have an Amazon account. If you're doing if you're buying things online, you probably already have an Amazon account, and you've already trusted Amazon with your information. So Amazon now says, hey, we can just process the order for you. And you can put a Pay with Amazon button on your website, and it will just process it for you. It will process the transaction for you, and the customer never has to give you their information. Now, Amazon's website will tell you that everybody trusts Amazon and that vendors are very happy because they've seen orders go up because people trust Amazon, so they're willing to do that. What they put way down in the notes is it could take 2 to 4 days for you to get your money, okay? Be careful of that. Be careful of all that. You in all of your, no matter who you're going to go with, find out how quickly the money gets back into your account. So you're going to give them a bank account that they will clear the transaction into. Find out how long that takes, because, and I don't know that they still do it, but Stripe in the early days, they had a very low transaction percentage, but they held on to your money for 2 days and they made money on the interest on the float. And that was how part of their whole business model. I think they've gotten away from that, and since they've gone into the standard transaction fee, I think they've moved past that. But you need to know how quickly you get your money after the sale. But Amazon Pay, they are correct in the fact that if people are buying things online, they probably have bought something from Amazon, which means they have an Amazon account, which means Amazon already has their address, already has their credit card number and everything. And that's information that you don't have to be responsible for. And then there's WooCommerce Payments. This is the new kid on the block, okay? And you think, oh, well, what does WooCommerce know about payment processing? Well, here's the dirty little secret. This is just a very well done implementation of Stripe, okay? It's a wrapper for Stripe, and it is a plugin that you can get, and it is probably, I would say it is much better than the standard Stripe implementation. And you can see they're right in line. Bottom line, I'm not going to tell you which one is best. We're about to go through each of them, but you seriously need to take a look at WooCommerce Payments. Okay, so let's talk a little bit. PayPal. PayPal is the granddaddy of all payment processors, okay? And PayPal standard is almost everybody's choice to get started with because it's easy. They've got things where you can just put a button on your website. If you've got a product page, you can put a button on your website. You don't even need WordPress and WooCommerce. If you've got one product that's selling for one price, you can throw up a static HTML page, put this button on there, and PayPal will deal with the rest. And quite honestly, if PayPal, either standard or their plugin that you can get and install on WooCommerce, if that meets all of your needs and you're satisfied with PayPal's terms and conditions, by all means, use them, okay? The upside is PayPal has been around for so long that they're pretty much ubiquitous. They're like Amazon. Everybody knows how to process them. And even if people don't have a PayPal account, they can put in just credit card information. They don't have to set up a PayPal account to purchase from you. If you're using PayPal, they can put in their credit card information and process it, and PayPal just works as the processor. Now, there's a downside. PayPal is not a bank. Now, here in the US, that means they're not regulated like a bank. In the US, banks have very specific rules about what they can and cannot do. PayPal doesn't have to follow those rules. I know everybody's probably heard the horror stories about, my dog's about to start barking, I'm sorry. Hang on just one second. Lay down, lay down. Sorry there. So if everybody's heard the horror stories about PayPal, I will give you this one that I actually know of and watched this one play out. Friend of mine over in Scotland was building a tech conference for PHP developers, and they had PayPal as their primary processor, and they had sold about 200 tickets at, I think the going rate at that point was $500 a piece. So we're not talking a trivial amount of money. PayPal said, hey, you're taking in too much money too quickly. We're not sure you're legit, and they froze it for 3 months. Well, he didn't have any other money. So he could not put deposits on venues. He could not put deposits on anything else. Basically, he had to cancel the event. And when PayPal unfroze the money, and they eventually did unfreeze the money, he had to refund it all. And everybody was very understanding because developers understand sometimes PayPal does this kind of stuff. So that's why I said, understand their terms and conditions. If you can live with their terms and conditions, and a lot of people can, it's not a problem, then by all means, use them, okay? But after that, I turned off PayPal on mine and have never used PayPal again on any of my processing. Stripe. Now, like I said, Stripe started out as a tool for developers, okay? It was an API. You had to use a command line tool to set up your account and to prove who you were, just so that they could prove that you were a developer, because they didn't have anything for front ends or anything. Now, soon after that, systems like WooCommerce and Shopify and Yahoo stores and all that started building extensions that would allow you to use them because they were a very good payment processor. These days, like I said, early on, they would sit on the money for 2 days and make money off the float. These days, I think that you get your money within 2 to 4 hours. But that's something you need to check on, and whatever processor you need to use. Like I said, you really need to know how quickly you're going to get paid. There is one major event host that the last time I looked at their processing, their internal processing, they held your money until after the event. That's just wholly unacceptable. I used to use them for all of my events, and I used to do a lot of online events before COVID made everybody do a lot of online events and made everybody do online events for free, so can't charge for them. But this event process or event system set up their own processing, and you actually had to opt out of it to not use it. And like I said, they would hold your money until after your event. And that's just, I can't do that. So make sure you understand the terms and conditions of whatever payment processor. But Stripe these days has pretty good system. They are very easy to get set up in WooCommerce, okay? They have, WooCommerce has a free plugin that you can use and sets it up, but even their getting the account set up is very easy to do, very easy to get set up. You should be able to set it up in probably about an hour's worth of work and maybe a day of waiting for your bank to approve the transactions, the test transactions, stuff like that. Okay, that's going to be the slow part. Any of these getting set up, you got to figure 24 hours. Okay, not that it's going to take you 24 hours to do it, but every one of them is going to want to do a test transaction. Sometimes it takes your bank a while to clear those transactions. So it's very easy stuff, and they have a test mode. Okay, which I think most of them do. PayPal's is kind of hard to work with, but with Stripe, it's just a matter of you get the, they give you your test keys and your production keys, and you just flip a switch and say, I'm in test mode or I'm in production mode. And in test mode, the test credit cards work, but they're assuming you're not actually shipping products, okay? If you leave it in test mode, people can use the test credit cards, and if you ship products, then well, you're going to be out the money for those products. So, but they have a very easy to use system. I really can't say that there's any downside to using Stripe. Okay, if it's not available in your country, and I was checking this morning, they're available in 130 countries. So, you know, I'm sure there are some out there, but they're not going to. Most of you that are listening to this are going to have access to Stripe. That is my personal favorite. I'm not saying use that one. I'm saying this one's the one I use. Okay. Then there's Square. Now, like I said, Square started out in fairs and festivals and green markets, and anytime you needed to process a credit card and you did not have a full-blown cash register and credit card terminal, but you did have a cell phone. That's what it was great for. I mean, they were one of the innovators. They were the ones that put out the little audio jack thing that you'd plug it in and you could do the swipe, the stripe, and process. I don't know if you know this or not, but that little magnetic stripe on the back of that, that's nothing more than the same thing as we used to make 8-track tapes and cassette tapes. And what's encoded in there is just basically audio signal that swiping across that brings it in. That's why they can use the audio jack, and then they convert it into digital information. So you've got, it's very good for that. And if that's your primary and e-commerce is a add-on to your system, if you do fairs and festivals, but you also want to sell your products on websites, Square's a great choice because they're new into e-commerce, but they are they integrate well with in real life. Okay, but the only downside is if you're only e-commerce, they're very new into this space, and that usually translates into there's some rough edges. Now, when I say new, they're a couple of years in now. Okay, they didn't set this up last week. They're a couple of years in, but still there are much more established options. And if you're not doing in real life transactions, I'd say Square is not gonna be your greatest option. Okay, but please look at it, take a look at its integration, see if it works for you. Amazon Pay. Now, they're new to payment processing, but new to payment processing for vendors, but certainly not new to payment processing in general. And Amazon is a solid choice, especially if you're selling internationally. Okay. Now, be aware. I don't know if you remember, and these slides, the recording will be available, so you can go back. But next to the transaction fee, Amazon had a little asterisk. Okay, that's because if the transaction fee is in a different currency, or I'm sorry, if the transaction is in a different currency than what you will be paid out in, then they have a foreign transaction fee that is higher. I think it's 40 cents instead of 30 cents. Okay, so and some of them do, some of them don't. But be aware of that. All the stuff that I do right now, I only take the payment in USD, and I get paid out in USD. That means if there is a transaction fee, it's on the user to pay the transaction fee. Their credit card will charge them for buying something in USD. If you don't want that, if you want to pay it, then you can set up WooCommerce to accept multiple currencies, and you will charge in one currency and you will get paid in your normal currency, but there's almost always some kind of fee. But Amazon makes it very clear on their system, on their payouts, that there is a domestic processing fee and there is a cross-border processing fee, okay? Here's my only problem with Amazon. I don't trust Amazon. Okay, I don't sell my products on Amazon. That's not entirely true. My books are up there, but my books are up there just so that I can say, hey, you can see this on Amazon. But most of the stuff that I sell on my own site because I want my customers to be my customers. And if you're selling through Amazon, then you don't have customers. You are using Amazon's customers. They do give you some very limited tools to contact the people that have purchased from you, but I have a mailing list going out every week to all the people that have purchased from me, a newsletter going out every week, and I can talk to my customers anytime I want because I own that relationship. If you are selling through Amazon, Amazon owns that relationship, and with Amazon Pay, it's the same thing, okay? I just don't trust them. And that's a gut feeling, and I realize that's very subjective. If you're going to use Amazon, and I'm not saying don't use Amazon, but if you're going to use Amazon, please understand the ramifications before you set it up. That's really it. They are ubiquitous, and since everybody has one, you don't have to worry about credit cards or anything, because if you've got the Pay by Amazon, boom, you can pay by Amazon. Oh, the one thing they make perfectly clear on their website, like they put this like 4 or 5 times, customers cannot use Amazon gift cards to buy products and pay via Amazon. That's just a no-no. Okay, then there's WooCommerce Payments. Okay, WooCommerce Payments is the new kid on the block, and it's a very compelling offering. But first and foremost, this is specifically designed to work with WooCommerce, and its workflow in the processing is by far the most complete and the most flexible. And I'm kind of excited about this. And this is really cool, if you go with WooCommerce Payments, they also incorporate Apple Pay. Okay, so you can have a Pay by Apple button. I don't know about you. I have, not only do I have an Apple card because we buy all of our movies and stuff via Apple TV, but I also have several of my other cards on my app in my Apple Pay wallet. Well, if I'm using Apple Pay, I can process through that, and what it means is my credit card never goes anywhere. Apple Pay processes it all, and they give the merchant and a transaction number that they can use, but they never ever leak my number, which I find that very secure. I have a serious distrust of all things big company and big tech, but Apple and security are, for security purposes, I trust Apple more than anybody else out there, and they've stood the test of time. Now, the downside to WooCommerce Payments is it's not a single plugin, okay? You're gonna need a series of them. For instance, if you want to accept Apple Pay, you're gonna have to install the Apple Pay plugin in addition to the WooCommerce plugin, WooCommerce Payments plugin. Now, they're both free, so it's not gonna cost you anymore, but it's just more things you've got to install. And another thing is, if you want to install, or if you want to accept payment in multiple currencies, then you're also going to have to install the multiple currencies extension in WooCommerce, and that's not a free one. So you're going to have to add on several things. But you can get up and running with the basics of WooCommerce Payments without having to buy any additional extensions. It's not necessarily a downside that it's spread over multiple extensions. It's just something you need to know about. Now, most payment processors are going to have a link that says, click here to get your API key. And I'm doing the quotey fingers because I realize there's some people out there that do not understand this terminology, and that's fine. You don't have to. You can follow the instructions on screen. They will give you a string of numbers and letters that is your key that you paste back into WooCommerce. Many processors will have 2 keys that you will have to use, and the plugins will tell you exactly how to do this. WooCommerce, when you go to set this up, WooCommerce Payments, when you go to set this up, it's going to take you through the Stripe initialization, or a version of the Stripe initialization. And you're going to basically, it's going to walk you through either logging into your Stripe account if you already have one, or setting up a new Stripe account. You can use an existing one. Because this is basically a better integrated Stripe than Stripe. The Stripe plugin is fine, it's okay, there's no problem with it, but this one is much better if you're using WooCommerce. Okay, Stripe has to be ubiquitous to all. WooCommerce Payments is specific to WooCommerce. I told you I have a serious distrust of all things big tech, and part of that is, when I first saw WooCommerce Payments, I'm like, well, WooCommerce is automatic. Why do I want to give automatic access to all of this and let them control my payments? Well, they're just a wrapper for Stripe, and I already trust Stripe. So I'm actually looking very seriously. I'm setting up a new e-commerce system for scuba divers, and I'm looking very seriously at just setting up WooCommerce Payments, and that's going to be my one and only. Because I told you, Stripe is my favorite, but this is Stripe taken to a whole new level. So if you're sticking with WooCommerce, and you know you're sticking with WooCommerce, and you already know and like and trust Stripe, look seriously at WooCommerce Payments. I've yet to see a downside other than, it's just part of the automatic, it's one more piece that Automatic owns, but I'm okay with this one. So that's it. We've looked at the major players. We've looked at what you need to look at when you're considering going to any given payment processor. Because taking payments, well, that's really the whole point. I mean, unless you're running a charity where you're giving things away, you need to be able to take people's money, and that's what we're talking about. But not all payment processors are created equal. And not all the payment processors I've described here are going to be available in your region. Check your region, see what is available, and ask some of your existing customers or potential customers which one they use, because the best one depends on what's available to you and what your customers already have. Okay, if they already have PayPal accounts or already have Amazon accounts, and those are good solutions for you. If, on the other hand, you find that most people just have credit cards and they just want to process credit cards, then find the processor in your area that gives you the best terms and the best turnaround. And turnaround being how quickly they get you your money.